When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor.
I'm the devil.
And I am he.
As far back as I can remember, it has always been thee and me together. We are like two halves of the same person.
I am the better looking half.
That's right, but I'm older and wiser.
By a minute.
Before we were rescued, we were never apart. I remember the woman taking us from the dark room where we lived. It was dark outside too. She brought us to a faraway place of rocks and caves and gave us a bag with food in it and left.
She never came back.
We were so afraid. We cried and held onto each other, trying to keep warm in the caves. We saw people, but hid from them because everyone who came to live in that place was dead. Everyone except us.
What Adele means to say is that people were brought dead to this place. They left them just like we were left. We took care of them and kept watch so they would be safe. We slept in the daytime, hiding ourselves in the tombs, and we kept our people company through the night.
At night, we looked for food. There were fruit trees all around and water. There were swine herds on the hillside, killed a pig to eat. Then we would sneak into their camp while they slept and take whatever they discarded. We'd gnawed on the pig bones until there was nothing left, inside or out.
As we survived and grew, we made tools from the bones, sharpening them into knives to cut branches from the trees. We cut linen from the shrouds covering our dead friends and wrapped ourselves in it to keep warm. We learned to make fires by watching the swine herds.
We were discovered one very cold night. While sneaking back to the tombs from the swine herd's camp, we stumbled over one of them in the brushes. He ran after us, but stopped at the edge of the graveyard. He would never have found us in the dark.
The next day, the man who chased us came back with some other men. When they found us sleeping in one of the tombs, they dragged us, yelling and screaming. We didn't understand them. They sounded like wild animals. We began to howl in response to their howling. They beat us and left us with our hands and feet bound by leather straps.
He was beaten so badly, he was unconscious for a very long time. I rolled over onto my knees and chewed the leather straps off his hands and feet. When he finally came to and was able to move, he cut off my bindings, and we crawled back into the safety of the tombs.
There had always been a chance that we might be discovered, but until now, we hadn't realized that discovery might cost us our lives. We had to figure out how to keep people away from us, away from the tombs. We had to frighten them away.
After that, when people came to bury their dead, we growled and we snarled behind the rocks and we shook the branches and bushes. Most people ran away. When the swineherds came looking for us, we were ready with slings and stones. We had excellent aim. Now we were older, bigger, and much stronger. If they came near, we jumped down from the rocks and ran after them, slinging the stones at their heads and their hind ends.
No one came near the tombs anymore because we made it a fearful place. It was the only way we knew to be safe in our home.
Until the day that Jesus, the Galilean, came and changed everything.
We were tending our gardens and pruning our fruit trees when we noticed him watching us. So we became fierce, stooping down, growling,
moving forward to him with our hands raised, ready to lunge if he didn't run away.
We shouted and cried in our language, "What are you doing here? Go away! You have nothing to do with us."
He didn't move. He did not blink an eye. I had never seen such a face. There was absolutely no fear in his face. His eyes were like the eyes of the people who brought their dead to the tombs.
His eyes weren't like the eyes of the swineherds who beat us.
The noises he made were strong noises, but they did not sound sad or angry or mean. We did not understand his sounds.
We had to protect each other and our home. We ran straight at him, screeching our loudest and most terrifying cries. We planned to knock him down and let him scramble away.
But we did not knock him down. We slammed into his body full force, both of us. But he did not falter, didn't move. Instead, he wrapped his arms tight around us and held us close.
We were both stunned, totally unprepared for whatever manner of attack this was. Suddenly, I felt strangely warmed inside. I stopped struggling.
I saw the calm expression on Fee's face, and I realized for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid for him or for me. Every muscle in my body just gave up its tension, relaxed relaxing in the Galilean's unbreakable embrace. It may have been minutes, or it may have been hours that he held us.
I think I might have fallen asleep. But I awoke to the commotion on the hillside. The swineherds were raving and screeching as they watched their whole herd rush down into the Sea of Galilee. They looked in our direction and saw us standing beside Jesus.
Shaking their fists right at us, they ran away.
Later that day, the swineherds returned. This time, they brought many people with them. Some of them were carrying sticks and torches of fire. They spoke their words, and Jesus took us each by the hand and led us away down the hill where we got into a boat and crossed the sea to his home.
That day, our lives began all over again.
Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed.
Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to releasing a prisoner to the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priest and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water, washed his hands, said, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself."
Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine drink, mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it.
And when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to. For he said, 'I am God's son.'" The bandits who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way.
My mother can be a real pain. I mean, I love Seraphina, but she can be a handful when she gets pushy. She runs a very successful business as a merchant in purple goods. She's well known and respected, and people will wait months for her custom-dyed fabrics. However, when she's on one of her missions to right a wrong, or running around recruiting supporters to chastise the city officials for shirking their duty, everyone avoids her. She goes to the city fathers on a regular basis to remind them of their responsibility to clean up the sewers, fix the dangerous potholes in the ground in the road, get the litter off the streets, and round up the overabundance of stray dogs. She takes in strays as well. But we already had 3, and one of them was pregnant. She warned the city that their shoddy attention to detail was bad for business. In a tourist town and major trade city, bad smells and starving dogs tend to drive the tourists away. Seraphina isn't afraid of anyone and never hesitates to speak her mind. She's not an angry or unreasonable woman. She is passionate and persistent in her pursuits. The truth is, her arguments are usually sound and her requests fair. More often than not, she doesn't win arguments. She simply wears down her opponents. But you see, Seraphina has been on her own since she was 16 and had to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. When I was 2 and hadn't started to walk yet, Mom took me to see a physician who said I had weak muscles. He called my condition hyperkinesia. I told her there was no cure. Seraphina wasn't insulted. She just decided to take matters into her own hands. She gave what she called my cranky nerves a daily workout. She exercised my arms and legs for me. She kept up the routine every day. Eventually, I could walk. In the beginning, I would just lose my balance and fall. But I was a very determined little girl and picked myself up. When I was old enough, I asked Seraphina about the jerky movements. She explained it this way. You have cranky nerves that yell at your muscles. Every time they yell, your muscles jump because they are startled. Whenever an unpredictable sudden movement in my leg, my my arm or my face betrayed my cranky nerve condition, Serafina simply refused to notice. I was teased unmercifully by some of the neighborhood kids who pointed at my wide walk and ran away if my arm or leg was suddenly startled. I remember one of them asked me what was wrong with me, and just as I was about to tell her about my cranky nerves, my face suddenly curled up in a grimace. The girl screamed and ran away. Whenever the big kids tried to bully me, my mother seemed to magically appear. She would grab the ringleaders by the arm or the ear, drag them off to their own homes, and hand them off to their parents, telling them in no uncertain terms that there had better not be a next time. Around the time of my 16th birthday, I began to suffer from headaches, so painful that I screamed with the agony of them. They lasted for hours and days. They kept coming back, no matter what the physicians and my mother gave me to take the pain away. When the headaches came, I was beside myself. I couldn't move or think or even breathe for the pain. One day, Serafina found me rocking back and forth, hitting my head against a wall. She knelt down and held my face close to hers. With tears in her eyes, she said, "I don't know what horrible demon has possessed you, my darling, but he will not take you from me. Hold on, my darling girl, hold on." She left the house. I don't know exactly when it happened, but the pain in my head suddenly disappeared. In my experience, if it had subsided for some minutes, I knew it would return, but it simply disappeared this time. I got on my bed and fell into a deep sleep. When my mother came home and found me sleeping, she got on my bed, gathered me close in her arms, and began to cry. In my whole life, I'd never seen my mother cry a single tear. I wanted to comfort her. When I looked at her face, I saw that these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of joy. She was smiling through her tears as she told me about her wild adventure, chasing a Hebrew holy man through the streets of the city. I had a million questions, but I didn't interrupt. She told me how he ignored her when she called out to him to save me from the terrible demon that was terrorizing my head. When she wouldn't relent, he stopped to speak to her and told her his work was for the sheep of the house of Israel. Serafina is nothing if not persistent. As he turned to go, she ran ahead of him and knelt down, stopping him in his tracks. This was Serafina's modus operandi, to dog them until they gave up or give in. But it seemed to me out of character for Serafina to beg anyone for anything, and particularly on her knees. "Lord, help me," she said, and he still refused her, saying it was not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. She went on saying, "Alyssa, darling, I don't know what happened. His words hurt me, yes, because I knew he was talking about me. He was talking about you and me. He described us like all those stray dogs roaming our streets. But when I answered him, the words I spoke weren't angry with words. Alyssa, I used his words to tell him I would accept any help he might give me. I said, 'Yes, Lord.' Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Just then, I saw the faintest smile on his face. I think he almost laughed. I told him I was a woman of great faith and said what I asked for would be, and he said, what I asked for would be done. That was it. And he walked away. Here you are, my dearest child, and your pain is gone. When we awoke the next morning, we looked at each other tentatively as if searching for signs of the terrible headache's return. I felt well. We dressed and set out to find the holy man whose followers called him Jesus. Seraphina insisted that we thank him. I suspected this would be a grand and public show of our appreciation. But when we found Jesus, he was sitting by himself, peacefully looking out at the sea. He appeared to be about the same age as my mother. When he saw Seraphina, he stood up, and the smile on his face was one of admiration. He was grinning so broadly I could see laugh lines gather in the corner of his eyes. He was delighted to see us. My mother placed something in my hands and motioned me forward. As I offered him the gift, he held my hands in his. I looked down and saw for the first time the most stunning of all the purple robes my mother sold. It was a robe made for royal shoulders. Still smiling, he flung the glorious robe over his shoulders with a grand flourish and waved goodbye to us as we headed back to town. As we walked along, I realized, perhaps for the first time, that my mother and I were the same height. I took note, too, that I was walking along beside her, not behind, trying to keep up. The fluid movement of my arms and legs was a wonder to me. I lifted my skirts and jumped up the little ways, landing, to my astonishment, solidly on the ground. I could lift my leg high and kick my foot out. I wanted to run, so I did. I ran all the way back to town. It felt wonderful to be out of breath for the first time in my life. Jesus had taken not only the robe, but my cranky nerves as well.
From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lima sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, this man is calling for Elijah. At once, one of them ran and got a sponge and filled it with sour wine and put it on a stick and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. Now when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, truly this man was God's son. Many women were also there, looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had provided for him. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee.
My name is Service. I have been a soldier in the legions of Caesar for more than 20 years. When I was first recruited out of the provinces, I pledged 25 years of my life and loyalty to the 6th Ironclad Legion, known as Ferrata. We served first under the great Mark Antony. Like all new recruits, I began as a private, trying not to trip over my armor. Whenever an opportunity arose, I enlisted. hoping for advancement, more pay, and the benefits granted by Roman citizenship. I joined the cavalry and became a horse soldier, and later, one of the training officers with the rank of under Centurion. With each rise in rank, my pay and my wealth doubled, even tripled. I gained responsibility and staff. My deputies were hardworking and loyal, but none equaled Miles. He was assigned to me in my 10th year of service. Taking charge of my schedule, Miles organized my life, sorting out my myriad of commitments so that I was able to invest appropriate time and energy in building up the cavalry, not supervising horsemen. Through his diligence, I was able to create order out of chaos, and in my 18th year of service, I was promoted to the rank of District Centurion, responsible for the administration and law enforcement in my appointed district. The powers that be sent me to the small garrison on the north coast of the Sea of Tiberias, in the town of Capernaum. 3 of my deputies came with me. Miles was among them. I know I was sent there to keep an eye on the Jewish population, but life was so peaceful and pleasant in the fishing community. Though the fishermen exported much of their fish, those of us fortunate enough to live there regularly dined on a day's catch. Administering the law in the region was often about settling disputes between rival business owners and keeping our eye on the silvery fingers of the local tax collectors. The cavalry made regular rounds, keeping a vigilant eye on the area. But we were often resented by the people. People had their problems, don't get me wrong, but the Jewish community was bound together by their common identity and heritage. They were well aware that they lived under the thumb of the Roman emperor, a Gentile. They waited with certainty for their day of triumph and redemption, when the Lord's Messiah would present himself. I didn't have time to spend wondering about the arrival of their Messiah. Having pledged my undying loyalty to Caesar, Rome's own Messiah and Son of God. When the man named Jesus came from Judea and began to teach about the kingdom of God, his God, everything changed. For one thing, the fish my soldiers and I looked forward to eating every day were no longer plentiful in supply. Crowds of people lined the shore of the lake listening to him speak from a fishing boat, but no one was catching fish. He spoke to crowds everywhere, teaching in the synagogues and on the hillsides. But he did not incite his listeners. He blessed them. They listened to him for hours as he encouraged them and warned them against judging one another. People also claimed that he was a healer, touching away leprosy and praying away blindness. I busied myself with my administrative tasks until I was called away to Jerusalem to meet the new governor of Judea. I had no qualms about leaving Miles in charge of the garrison, but not long after I left, he had a terrible accident. His horse was startled by a snake in the road and shied away so violently that Miles was thrown off. He landed on an outcropping of jagged rocks, and when he managed to recover his breath, he found he could not move. The soldiers carried him back to the garrison, where physicians attended to his needs as best they could, but they all said there was nothing to do. He had broke his back. When I received word of what had happened, I hurried back to Capernaum. Miles had been my right arm, my closest friend for nearly a decade. I loved him as if he were my son. I brought him to my home where I could supervise his care personally, but in spite of my best efforts, he was wasting away. Miles' diligent and inexhaustible spirit was ebbing away. Soon he would give up on life, and that was a loss that I just could not bear. Desperate, I mounted my horse and I began to ride. I had no idea where I was going, or what I was running toward or away from. Suddenly, as if to appear out of nowhere, Jesus, the Holy Man, was walking toward me. I reined in my horse. Could a Jewish healer help me? Would he help me, a Gentile? I didn't know how to approach him. How would he react if confronted by a Roman centurion astride his horse? I dismounted and removed my helmet. Dropping my helmet and reins to the ground, I left my horse and walked slowly toward Jesus. He showed no alarm or distress. It was almost as if he had been waiting for me. When I came close, I lowered my gaze, and I told him about Miles. Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed and in terrible distress. Jesus immediately offered to come to my home to help. I was stunned. This just was not done. Legally, Gentiles were considered unclean in Jewish circles. I was tongue-tied and unable to sort out my words. Through a flood of tears, I said, Lord, I am not worthy to have you under my roof, but only speak the word, and my servant will be healed. I babbled on and on. I think I gave him my credentials. At last he said, Go, let it be done, for you according to your faith. As I turned to leave, I saw the gentle expression in his eyes as a smile came across his face. When I got back to the house, Miles was standing at attention next to his bed, and all I could do was fall to my knees, sobbing with relief. I saw Jesus many times after that. I became kind of a referral service, sending all sorts of different people to see him and listen to his teachings. When I was transferred 3 years later to take charge of Pontius Pilate's Praetorian Guard, I hated to leave Capernaum, but I left the people in good hands. Miles was their new district centurion. In Jerusalem, I found crucifixions were not rare. It was the accepted method of capital punishment for anyone who threatened the integrity of Caesar's empire. But when Jesus was brought before Pontius Pilate to stand trial, I wanted to hide my face in shame. Our eyes met, and it was as if I could read every one of his thoughts. Relief, perhaps at recognizing a friend, fear, and determination. For the first time, I was ashamed to be a Roman soldier. But if I walked away, if I hid myself away, there would be no one there with him. I know it sounds ironic, maybe even cruel, but I stayed with him. I walked along him every step of the long and arduous way. I was there when he faltered and when he fell. I heard his every cry and every word he spoke as we drove the nails into his hands. On his face, even through the pain, was that ever-forgiving and tender expression. At the sound of his final cry, I felt the earth shaking beneath my feet, and I heard myself say, truly, this man is God's son.
When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph. He was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given him. So Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in its own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. He then rolled the great stone to the